You are listening to the Emergency Broadcast Systems. This station broadcasts emergency news and official information on the air for assigned area.
You know, we talk an awful lot about portable power on this channel, but what about those times when it's not possible to actually deploy our portable powering gear? Now, 2021 has really been a turning point on the channel. We've taken a step back from high power, high current QRO radios, moving over to lighter, smaller, more energy efficient QRP radios, augmented by amplifiers when required. On October 22nd and 23rd, Oscar Hotel 8 Hotel Uniform Bravo and I were camped out in the bunker on Hailuoto Island. Now, what made this trip interesting was a storm rolling in at the same time we were deployed on the island. The thing is, we had no idea the intensity of the storm would be what it was. Although it doesn't look so bad in this outside shot from the bunker, the wind gusts were bad enough that we wouldn't risk deploying our solar panels. Now, we knew we would be okay inside the bunker, at least we believed so. We staked it down pretty well and we deployed it behind this group of trees to get some protection from the incoming winds. Inside the bunker, we had the wood stove running for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, and most obvious, is to stay warm, but secondly, to keep our batteries from freezing. One little known fact about lithium and lithium iron phosphate battery technologies is they can be discharged below freezing, but they can't be recharged while at that temperature. So the wood stove makes it comfortable for the operators, makes it possible to have warm food and drinks, and makes it possible to utilize our batteries without damaging them. So why is this all important? Well, not having the possibility to deploy our solar panels was a complete logistical fail. That's because we only brought very small 5 amp hour batteries for the TX500 and the IC705. Now, with the exception of the time we were actually sleeping, the radios were on all the time and we were making contacts. The question becomes, how was this possible? Well, it was made possible by something I've been talking about on the channel all year long. Now, here's some necessary context. I constantly get comments from operators saying they won't buy a QRP radio, they'll simply buy a QRO radio and turn the power down to 5 watts. That strategy is absolutely okay if your goal is simply to work QRP. On the other hand, if you're watching this channel, your goal is probably efficient off-grid communications. So if that's true, that QRO radio turned down to 5 watts still draws an amp, at least 1 amp on receive, whereas a QRP radio draws a fraction of that amount. They often counter with a comment like, it doesn't matter how efficient your QRP radio is if nobody can actually hear you. Well, that's a fair comment, but you know what? It's the reason I'm augmenting my QRP radio with an amplifier, and in fact, my IC705 with an amplifier's current consumption is 300 milliamps. The TX500 with an amplifier is even less. At max output power, we're drawing little more than 8 amps. That's much more efficient than any QRO radio on the market today. The final argument of many of these anti-efficiency advocates is, if you're worried about the difference between 300 milliamps and 1 amp, you've got bigger problems. Unfortunately, this is absolute nonsense. The person doesn't understand what we're trying to achieve with efficient off-grid communications, and there's no reason to continue the discussion. Ultimately, we find ourselves asking the question, are our QRO radios really sustainable for off-grid and emergency communications? For the off-grid community, the answer isn't very encouraging. But that's enough about that. Many of you have been asking me to share more details about the station when we're out on these deployments, so let's do that now. The shelter we used this time was the Nortent Gamme 4. You usually hear me call it the bunker, and I call it the bunker because it seems to just last and survive through anything, any weather, any temperature. It's always good to go. It's hard not to feel safe, especially after riding out this storm. The titanium wood stove also comes from Nortent of Norway. Now, admittedly, during this storm, I realized that perhaps I should go ahead and order a larger wood stove for the bunker. I mean, this one is magnificent, it weighs nothing, and it packs flat. But I'd like a wood stove which is easier to put together and holds more heat, so we can be more comfortable during these extreme deployments. I'm not unhappy with this one though. I'll still use it in more forgiving times of the year, but for now, I'll go ahead and pull the trigger on something more compatible with the extreme weather we have at 65 degrees north. Alright, so now let's talk about my sleep gear. My rack is the one on the left side of the bunker. My sleeping bag was a surplus Finnish Army M05 from Corinthia Systems. It's absolutely comfortable down to about minus 15, but livable down to minus 38 Celsius. That basically means you won't freeze to death at minus 38. My cot comes from Alpidex. I wanted to get something that would put some space between the cold ground and my rear end. This was my first time using it, and actually it worked out really well. If I were hiking, I certainly would leave it at home, but for this trip, it was absolutely okay. Now we can move on to the radio equipment. I actually had two antennas with me this time, the Super Antenna MP1 and the Chameleon Antenna MPAS Lite. The goal was to operate two unique radios on this excursion, one for data modes, with the other operating SSB. Now I'll leave it to Hotel Uniform Bravo to explain why he ended up using my second radio. In the end, it was actually a good thing, but look, I'll leave a link to his blog post in the description. So Hotel Uniform Bravo ended up using my Discovery TX500, and he did an absolutely magnificent job with that. The TX500 with an 80-meter in-fed half-wave antenna was absolutely stellar. Let's take a moment to listen to Hotel Uniform Bravo.
Yes, copy 557344. Oliko muita, Otto Heikki 8, Heikki Urho Bertta kautta Paavo? CQ Flora Fauna, CQ Flora Fauna, Oscar Hotel 8, Hotel Uniform Bravo Stroke Papa.
Outstanding. Please don't forget to take a look at his blog. On the data side of things, I was running the Icom IC705 with the Microsoft Surface Go 2. It's not like you haven't heard a lot about this in the last few months. Now, because of the storm, I really had to adapt to the severe weather conditions we were experiencing with the station, so I put the station in low power mode, 5 to 10 watts, and I tried connecting with various RMS gateways around Scandinavia. It was very interesting to see how the storm played havoc with links which were traditionally very reliable. All in all, I would call this a success. The reason I'm saying that is we went into this thinking we would be able to deploy our solar power. We ended up having to ration our power while continuing to make contacts and not wasting the trip. We achieved many of our communications goals despite being forced to operate on battery power alone. Personally, this trip validated the idea of low-power, high-efficiency communications equipment for the field. I also realized that we need to shift a bit of the responsibility. We need to rely more on operator skill rather than output power, leaving our QRO option as a last resort. Another takeaway was the understanding that we can't always stick to our plan. When that happens, it's actually the constant training, the continuous training, which allows us to adapt to these changing scenarios. But I hope I'm not misleading anyone. I wouldn't want you to think it was all shivering misery inside the bunker. It certainly wasn't. Now, the first thing we did after getting the shelter put up was start a fire in the bunker. This is really survival 101. We get the fire going so we can create some comfort in the shelter in order to carry out more challenging tasks. For example, if we get our hands cold while setting up antennas, we can always come back inside the shelter, the warm shelter, and heat up our hands, then go and continue that task. We wouldn't like to be cold and wet when we're trying to build the fire, so get that out of the way first. Once the fire was going, we went ahead and set up our sleep systems for the night. This is again that situation where you don't want to come from outside cold, wet, shivering, trying to fiddle these things together. You get them out of the way first while you're warm and comfortable. So you've got your shelter up, you've got your fire going, you've got your rack set up and your sleep system ready. You've got your antennas up outside now. Now you can enjoy the ambience of the wood stove and have a listen to the radio. By this time, you've probably realized you're starving. You haven't eaten anything since you arrived on the island. You set up your camp. You set up your radio equipment. Now we can enjoy something to eat. We decided to pick up some locally grown organic beef from a farm there on the island while on the way to our operating location. We kept it simple, a couple of steaks, some onions, some carrots, and that was it. There really are no words to describe how amazing this meal was after doing all the work to set up the camp. Anyway, I guess what I'm really trying to say with this part of the video is there's so much more that goes into off-grid communications than just setting up our radios for a couple of hours at a time. During this storm, we had an opportunity to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We had an opportunity to operate our stations without all of the luxuries we would normally have. And ultimately, we took these lessons and turned them into a less is more approach to off-grid communications. These lessons were absolutely priceless.